Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in from all around the world. I can see that some people say that they miss Syriana Analysis. I really, again, missed myself working and presenting live streamings to you guys. Unfortunately, I had to deal with a personal matter in the past 2 weeks. So the last live streaming that I did was 2 weeks ago, but here I am back again to my office. I always like to build human communication with the audience, although I cannot see you personally, but I can read your comments. So I'm being very honest with you. It was a matter that I couldn't delay. So I had to deal with this issue, and soon, and this is coming, this soon is in the next few months, you will know what was this absence about, because I like to share with you also my personal matters that also is linked to my professional career, which is presenting political commentaries and analysis to the wide audience who want to learn about something new that is happening in the Middle East, West Asia, and around the world. And nowadays, the issues in Palestine is still unfolding, and it's crazy. Even though I was away from YouTube, but I was all the time checking on X, or previously known Twitter, of the massacres are non-stop in the Gaza Strip, and it seems that we have reached to a point where this type of massacres have been normalized to the international public, and this type of atrocities against kids, babies, have been normalized. So I always say, when we normalize such things, and in the future when similar atrocities happen, then the international public will be used, unfortunately, to it. And this is not a good precedent. And for the first time, we can see that these type of atrocities are normalized in the era of social media and the people. And there are people who are justifying it, unfortunately. Today's video is about how the Biden administration is complicit with the massacres and atrocities happening in the Gaza Strip. And in the second part, I will also address the Ukraine war. And it seems that the end of the Ukraine war is also near, or the end of the Zelensky's rule in Kiev is also coming to an end. And we will address that also. But a week ago, or 7, 8 days ago, there was voting in the UN Security Council for a permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip between the militants in the Gaza Strip and Israel. And even the UK, which is again complicit with weapons, political cover, media cover with Israel, they abstained. The only country that vetoed the resolution is the United States. So, unfortunately speaking, when the UN Security Council wants to vote for such a resolution, binding resolution, when one of the powers that have the right to veto, when they use their veto, the resolution cannot be adopted. And this was the session. I just want to show you guys how the United States looks like alone in the international arena nowadays, when the entire world is in supportive of a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Because remember, what's the opposite of the ceasefire, right? The opposite of ceasefire is war. And this war has killed how many people? Around 18,000 civilians in the Gaza Strip, of which 6 to 7,000 of them are kids, and there you have around 4,000 to 5,000 of them are women. So when you say you're against a ceasefire in such type of war, then you're agreeing and being complicit with the murder of the children and the women. And or at least, even if you are against such a ceasefire, you need to urge your partner, your ally, to change its military tactics in the Gaza Strip, which is something is not happening despite what the American officials are saying in public. But underground, we can see that all sorts of weaponry, including white phosphorus, by the way, being used in Gaza and in Lebanon, are coming from the United States. So let's see how the United States was alone in the UN Security Council in the face of the world.
Raise your hand.
En contra.
Against.
Abstenciones.
Abstentions.
El resultado de la votación.
The result of the vote is as follows: 13 votes in favor, 1 against, 1 abstention.
So, unfortunately, I mean, nowadays there is a campaign on social media platforms calling for the for expelling the United States from the UN, and I think it is a legitimate demand because the United States has the responsibility as a superpower to preserve the peace and stability, especially the international peace and stability, and something that the United States apparently cannot uphold or doesn't want to preserve the peace and security around the world. And yesterday there was another vote in the UN General Assembly this time, but unfortunately the UN General Assembly doesn't have a binding power or forcing power. Anyways, the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly adopted a resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. The countries that voted against the ceasefire are Israel, the United States, Austria. I don't know why Austria voted against it. Czech Republic. I learned that the Czech Republic is having loans and military assistance from the United States recently in order to quote unquote modernize their army. That's why they voted in favor of against the resolution. Guatemala, I also learned that there was a coup in the 50s or in the 60s in Guatemala, and since then the CIA engineered a huge civil war which lasted for many decades, and hundreds of thousands of people perished, and then they appointed a pro-government regime in Guatemala. That's why Liberia, Micronesia, Nauru, Papua, and Guinea, and all these countries, I truly don't know where are they anyways on the map. Paraguay, I'm not sure why, probably I don't know. I don't want to speculate, but those are the countries who voted in favor of a ceasefire, and those who abstained: Argentina, Bulgaria, uh, Cabo Verde, Cameroon, Equatorial, Georgia, Germany, of course, Hungary, Italy, Lithuania, Malawi, Marshall Islands, Netherlands, Palau, Panama, Romania, Slovakia, South Sudan. I mean, South Sudan, they were separated from Sudan. Sudan, they separated into two parts, and Southern Sudan is pro-Israel, by the way. And this was also another Israeli American engineered partition of Sudan, just like they wanted to partition that, just like they balkanized the Balkans. Actually, they divided it and they wanted to balkanize Syria, Togo, Tonga, Ukraine, guys, the country which was crying rivers in the past 2 years that their sovereignty has been violated, and now they are for this war against the Palestinians of Gaza, United Kingdom, and Uruguay. So those are the countries who abstained. I made a quick video about this case. I don't know if you guys all watched it. I posted it on Syriana Analysis when I was away from my desk. But this is a video I posted about it. And I said the US carte blanche for Israel to carpet bomb Gaza and annihilate the Palestinians is morally indefensible and shows that Washington cannot play the role of global leadership. Let's take a look together.
February of this year marked the 20th anniversary of U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell's 2003 speech at the UN Security Council, where he lied to the international public about Iraq's alleged position and development of weapons of mass destruction to justify the neocons' pre-planned war of aggression against Iraq. This hand, which presented false evidence to the world, had consequences. It led to the invasion, occupation, and destruction of a sovereign nation and the killing of hundreds of thousands of its people during and in the aftermath of the war. The power vacuum that the US and the UK invaders left in Iraq paved the way for the rise and expansion of terror groups such as the Islamic State in Iraq, which later expanded to Syria. People usually think the criminals are only the invading soldiers, but every US sponsored invasion or war crimes preceded diplomatic and media activity to prepare the ground for the upcoming aggression. I can count countless examples of American abuse of power within the corridors of the UN and outside. But the recent example of the US veto of the humanitarian ceasefire resolution in Gaza, where 61% of the Palestinians killed by Israeli airstrikes are civilians, displays a callous disregard for civilian suffering in face of the staggering death toll. This raised hand of Robert Wood means the Biden administration is unlike John Kirby's claim that no one has done more for Palestinians of Gaza than the US is utter bullshit. In fact, were it not for the American weaponry and diplomatic cover, Israel could not continue bombarding Gaza with complete impunity. Retired Israeli Major General Itzhak Brik says, I quote, all of our missiles, the ammunition, the precision guided bombs, all the airplanes and bombs, it's all from the US. The minute they turn off the tap, you can't keep fighting. You have no capability. Everybody understands that we cannot fight this war without the United States, period. This raised hand, the American cover up, and complicity will be etched into the annals of history inscribed on the page of disgrace. What the US is doing is morally indefensible, a dereliction of the US duty to prevent atrocity crimes and a complete lack of global leadership. So spare us these silly attempts of appointing black and brown people to do the dirty job and whitewash the ugly face of the US empire. Do they really think we are dumb and we cannot see through the manipulation of identity politics? The world has watched this session closely, and they will never forget this moment. The US is done, finished, no longer the world's police, but rather the world's biggest warmonger in the eyes of the majority of the world.
Raise your hand.
En contra.
Against?
Guys, I want to ask you a question here. Do you really think that the United States is it has an enormous influence on Israel, or it's the other way around. There are different opinions about this. Some say that the Israeli ally is instrumental for the American foreign policy in the Middle East, and others say that Israeli lobby and other people with special interests in the United States are in charge of the foreign policy or have an influence over the foreign policy of the United States. Why I'm asking you this question, because there are two different opinions about this, and so I will come back to that, and I will tell you. For example, in this video, I said that the United States is able to stop this war in Gaza because the weapons coming to the Israelis are from the American side. And this is a quote by, as I told you, Israeli Major General Yitzhak Brik, who is a retired general. He says, all of our missiles, the ammunition, the precision guided bombs, all the airplanes and bombs, it's all from the United States. The minute they turn off the tap, you cannot keep fighting. You have no capability. Everyone understands that we cannot fight this war without the United States, period. However, there are other people. I was watching Kim Everson. I don't know if you guys know her. She's a brilliant journalist from the United States. She was saying something different, and I will come back to that later because I will show you what she said in this regard. But before that, I will also tell you that American weapons are also including the phosphorus. And so the American side is supplying the Israelis with white phosphorus, which is, of course, illegal to be used in civilian areas. And this is from the Washington Post. They say Israel used US supplied white phosphorus munitions in an October attack in southern Lebanon that injured at least 9 civilians. So this is what we are speaking about. If you use it in civilian areas, it's prohibited. I don't know what's the measures when you have to use it against combatants. I'm not an expert in that. But in this particular case, the white phosphorus was used against civilians. And this is what the human rights group says should be investigated as a war crime, according to Washington Post analysis of shell fragments found in a small village in Lebanon. A journalist working for the Washington Post found remnants of the 355 millimeter artillery rounds fired into the area near the border of Israel, which incinerated at least 4 homes, residents said. The rounds eject felt wedges saturated with white phosphorus, which burns at high temperatures, producing billowing smoke that obscures troop movements as the substance falls haphazardly over a wide area. It can stick to skin, causing potentially fatal burns and respiratory damage, and its use near civilian areas is generally prohibited under international humanitarian law. However, who cares about international humanitarian law, right? It's just a ink on a paper if there is no one is forcing this law to the general to the let's see this one. If it's not forced on the rest of the world, then it's just an ink on a paper. And if the United States is working as the guarantor that the Israelis will not be be accountable for what they are doing here, then what is the use of international law, right? And this is an article from Reuters again. And of course, continue without supporting us. The White House is just concerned, guys, at reports that Israel used white phosphorus in Lebanon attacks. So they have nothing but a little bit, how to say, just a concern, right? Like the UN, when they issue concerns about so many things around the world, and the United States is concerned about reports Israel used US supplied white phosphorus munitions in an October attack in southern Lebanon. White House spokesperson John Kirby said on Monday. I mean, what did they expect? They also supplied Ukrainian forces with white phosphorus. Do you really give someone white phosphorus for them to keep it in their like in the storages? Of course they're going to use it, right? And he says, quote, we have seen the report, certainly concerned about that. We will be asking questions to try to learn a little bit more, Kirby told reporters on Air Force One. Kirby said white phosphorus has, quote, legitimate military utility for illumination and producing smoke to conceal movements. Look, when the alleged chemical attacks happened in Syria, the United States was so sure 3 minutes later that who used it, where this weapon was used, and the accusations were ready, right? But now, when their ally is using white phosphorus with evidence that is coming from Lebanon and reported not by pro-Lebanese sources, but from the Washington Post reporter there, then they have to learn a little bit more. They have to ask questions, and they just express some concerns. Anyways, he says, obviously, anytime that we provide items like white phosphorus to another military, it is with the full expectation that it will be used in keeping with those legitimate purposes and in keeping with the law of the armed conflict, he said. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant asked about the report that Israel used white phosphorus in Lebanon. He said, the IDF and the entire security establishment acts according to international law. That is how we have acted and how we will act. So, what do you think, guys? Is Israel abiding with international law by when they use the phosphorus over the Gaza Strip, over densely populated areas in the Gaza Strip, over Lebanon, which injured civilians, 9 civilians, and from the previous use of the white phosphorus, for example, in Fallujah in Iraq, in Raqqa in Syria, the birth defects, the permanent health damages that this type of weaponry can use against the civilians, right? And when they say that they are using it under international law or in accordance with international law, and at the same time they say that, oh, these Hamas people and these Hezbollah people, they are hiding among the civilian population, then if we want to believe you that this is correct 100%, then you're using also in civilian areas. If you say that these quote-unquote terrorist groups are embedding themselves among the civilian population, right? But who cares? Who cares? If Israel can do whatever they want and with no repercussions, with complete impunity, and they have the United States vetoing everything in the UN Security Council that is slightly against Israel, so there is no accountability. Why would Israel care if there is no accountability, guys? And this is something that is very important. Normalizing this type of crimes, it's not good for the future of humanity, regardless of who is committing these crimes, whether it's X, whether it's L, whether it's M, whether it's Israel, whether it's United States, whether it's Russia, whether it's China. It doesn't matter. The moment we normalize these types of atrocities, and the superpower like the United States uses the veto power at the UN Security Council to abort and block any resolution that condemns such atrocities and calls for a ceasefire, this creates a precedent for the future. And in the future, when a country X that is not the United States or Israel invades another country, and when they adopt similar strategy, they will point a finger and say, guys, shut up. Just last year or 2 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you did worse than that. So you are setting the bar very high now with the Gaza war. It's not even a war, right? It's just an onslaught. You're setting the bar so high that in the future, other countries, if they want to invade other countries or commit some war crimes or violate the sovereignty of other countries, you're setting the bar so high that anything under this bar will be considered acceptable. This is a very dangerous precedent. And this is what I said in the short video on X where I posted. The United States lost all legitimacy as the world's police. And they're not playing their role, their responsible role as a superpower to secure the international peace and security. They are actually doing exactly that, the opposite of that. Therefore, the calls for to expel the United States from the UN Security Council or from the UN, which is something never going to happen. However, the moment the international public, and we're not speaking about governments now, the international public is very important, guys. And were it not important, Israel and the United States, they wouldn't have to employ now tens, probably hundreds of influencers on social media platforms to shape the narrative. It is very important, international public, and that's why they are employing all these so-called influencers on X, Instagram. They're giving them hell of a money to promote certain narratives, right? So the international public nowadays, I don't know if you agree with me, but if you go on X, if you go on Instagram, if you go on Facebook, The vast majority of the people are sick and tired of this. The vast majority of the people can clearly see, even if they are silent in their verbally, but in their heart, in my opinion, they cannot fathom the fact that some country can just murder all these children without accountability. And of course, they try to portray criticism of Israel with anti Semitism, which is very, very ridiculous. Like, if a country A that believes in Buddhism and these Buddhists are committing similar atrocities, and if you criticize the policy of the state that claims to represent the Buddhists, that doesn't mean you are anti Buddhist. You are criticizing a policy of a country, and this policy is causing horrendous atrocities and big carnage in the region, and it's destabilizing the international peace and security. So trying to mix these issues together, it's very, very dishonest. And I'm sure if you guys have voiced any pro-Palestinian opinion, if you said that you're for Palestinian statehood, you are for dignified life for the Palestinians, I'm sure most of you have been accused of being anti-Semite, right? This has become the norm nowadays. And we shouldn't normalize this. And today I was discussing something with a friend on X, and I came to the conclusion that the Jewish people are safer in Syria, in the dictatorship Syria, than in Israel. In my opinion, the Israeli government, by claiming that they are the sole representative of the Jewish people and then committing such crimes, they are attributing the Jewish people to these crimes, right? And I'm not saying the Jewish people are complicit, but in the eyes of many, when you say I represent the Jewish people and and this government is committing these crimes, the people will feel also, they will have negative sentiments towards the Jewish people. So the rise of anti-Semitism against the Jewish people is also linked to the Netanyahu government. In my opinion, the Netanyahu government is not doing any service to the Jewish people around the world. But they're very powerful. They have lots of lobbies, and some of these lobbies are now pretending to be the victims in the universities, because some people said quote free Palestine, and now they feel insecure and unsafe all of a sudden, while hundreds of people are perishing every day in the Gaza Strip, and also humiliated. I cannot show you, unfortunately, this picture because YouTube will block this video, and they will demonetize it and do all these things that they usually do. But I'm sure you have all seen these photos coming from the Gaza Strip, where the Israeli forces are detaining what they called Hamas terrorists, which we don't have any evidence that they were Hamas or affiliated with Hamas. They just look middle-aged and early 20s, and between the 20s and the 50s men, and they're strapping them from their clothes, keeping them only with their underwear, and just pre-recorded videos of them handing over some weapons, which could be done staged very easily. I'm not saying some of them were not Hamas militants. I'm just saying it's very easy to stage such videos, and with the track record of the Israeli side to create big lies that were very easy to debunk, I have no trust in such videotapes, right? So, in my opinion, those videos are aimed at humiliating and creating an image that Israeli forces are achieving military successes, and that all these men were from Hamas, and that they surrendered. So they are showing it to the international public and to their people that we are achieving victories there. And at the same time, the second goal is to create this image of humiliated Arab Palestinians. This is very important in the war, in the information warfare, or in the propaganda matter, that you have to create an image that your enemy is defeated and humiliated, so that you encourage others, if there are other people who want to surrender, etc., that this is your future, right? This is how things are usually during wars, and it doesn't matter if it's Israel or not. And this is the spokesperson of the American side again being asked about this. He's the U.S. State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller. He was challenged by Sky News U.S. correspondent Mark Stone on Israeli forces detaining a number of Palestinian men who were stripped to their underwear and blindfolded, and what conversation the U.S. has had with Israeli officials. Take a look.
Matt, thank you. Mark Stone from Sky News. Can I just return to the images of the Palestinians stripped and in the back of vehicles and seemingly handing in weapons? Why not just condemn the images now? Why wait for an investigation as you've asked for?
As I said, we found them deeply disturbing. I just don't have any additional comment on it.
But can I follow up? Is there any circumstance in which those sorts of images would be acceptable?
Again, we found them disturbing. I don't want to discuss other potential circumstances. We have found them disturbing. We've asked them to clarify the circumstances of these detentions, and we're going to look to them to provide those details.
And how long will you wait?
Again, that is how long it will take is a question for them. We have pressed them for details about these circumstances. We expect them to provide.
Okay, because the reason I ask is because on many different moments over the course of the past, however many weeks it has been, we've heard the American administration say we've asked for, we're concerned, or we've asked for clarification, we've asked for more detail. And yet the moments keep coming. And I wonder, is it actually the case that you are behind the scenes actually not that worried about Israel's tactics, its military tactics on the ground?
Or
have you lost all leverage with a close ally?
So I appreciate the gotcha nature of the question. Genuinely,
it's not. It's not.
Sure. Genuinely it is, but that's okay. It's fair.
It's not a gotcha.
If you stop, I'll answer the question. I answer questions of all types. I will say that you should take our words at face value. When we're concerned about something, it's because we're concerned. And when we say that we have direct, candid, sometimes quite difficult conversations with the Israeli government, it's because we do. And I will go back to something that I said earlier in this briefing. When you look at the totality of our engagement with the Israeli government over the course of this conflict, there have been a number of times where we went to them and said, this is an action we need you to take. And the reaction from them has been, oh, it's something that we can't do. It will be very difficult. You've seen them come out publicly and reject it. And we work on it behind the scenes and we deliver results. We've done that with respect to pauses. We've done that respect to humanitarian assistance. You've seen us do that just in the past week with respect to fuel. You've seen us do it with deconfliction zones in the south to ensure that there are places where civilians can be that are the deconfliction sites so they're not struck by the Israeli military. So we mean very much what we say. We follow up with the Israeli government. Sometimes things don't move as quickly as the public would want. They don't move as quickly as we want. But we engage with them on these tough conversations because we care very much about getting this right. We care about protecting civilians. We care about getting access to the care that they need. And so we will continue to engage with the Israeli government at all levels on all of these issues.
So lastly, if I could just...
So what do you think, guys, of this? Do you really think that the US is doing enough and they're asking their ally in Israel to show some self-restraint, to respect international law, and in such cases when there is clear violation of international humanitarian law or international law, or it's about war crimes, do you really think that the Americans will hold the Israeli side accountable? If they are not going to hold accountable, is advising the Israeli side or sending them some recommendations and concerns is enough in this case? What should the American government do in this regard? And this is the question that I always want to ask, because there are now two theories, right? So this in the past 32 minutes, we are addressing this American complicity with the Israeli carnage in the Gaza Strip against the Palestinians there. And this is where we reach to conclusion that the US and the Biden administration is complicit with Israel in the war crimes in the Gaza Strip. This is when we take all this context that we have spoken in the past 30 minutes in this live streaming, right? And this is where we are leading to with this article by Arin Mate. He is a Jewish American journalist, by the way, and he says Israel's genocide in Gaza has Biden's green light. As Israeli warplanes resumed bombing Gaza on December 1st, putting an end to a 7-day pause, Secretary of State Antony Blinken's motorcade sped out of his hotel in Israel on its way to Tel Aviv airport, the Washington Post reported. Before exiting Israel, Blinken claimed that he had pressed its government to prioritize minimizing harm to innocent civilians. But according to Axios, Blinken didn't ask Israel to stop the operation, but said the longer the high intensity military campaign goes on, the more international pressure will build on both the United States and Israel to stop it. The Wall Street Journal characterizes the current U.S. approach as, quote, urging its top ally in the region to consider preventing large-scale civilian casualties while supplying many of the munitions deployed. So Arin Mate here says the U.S. position is therefore akin to an accomplice continuing to rearm a school shooter's assault rifle while asking him to consider slaughtering fewer students. The Biden administration is so committed to fueling the carnage in Gaza that it has even invoked rare emergency powers for transferring tank ammunition without congressional review. Quote, the arms shipment has been put on an expedited track, and Congress has no power to stop it. Quote, ended the New York Times reports. The White House's circumvention of congressional review is consistent with its refusal to follow U.S. law, which bars weapons transfers to countries that commit serious human rights abuses. The Biden administration has evaded this requirement by simply pretending that it is a helpless bystander rather than willing accomplice. The U.S. decision to not play judge and jury continues to this day. According to the Washington Post, administration officials now acknowledge the United States is not conducting real-time assessment of Israel's adherence to the laws of war. The reason is obvious. If the White House were to conduct such assessment, it would be forced to stop supplying Israel with weapons. So, this is the first theory, right? That the US administration is complicit, willingly complicit with the Israeli crimes in the Gaza Strip. But there is a second theory now, and I'm going to show you the video of Kim Everson, which I found it also interesting because I want to show you guys both sides of the story in this regard. And both sides doesn't mean that this is an Israeli point of view, but this is a different point of view of why Israel or the United States is supporting Israel in this regard. She says, I have a theory that the US is only voting alongside Israel because what else are they going to do? If the US votes against them and Israel does what it wants to do, it showcases that the US has lost control of its little brother Israel. That would be embarrassing. Let's take a look.
Minus them, the world overwhelmingly wants to see Israel stop this war. The world overwhelmingly is against Israel on this. The world is overwhelmingly looking at Israel in disgust, and they are losing the war. They're losing the narrative war. This is what Biden is trying to tell them. You guys are losing it. People are not respecting you. They're not going to like you after this. You are being accused of genocide and ethnic cleansing because you're doing that. And the world will look at you completely differently if you continue to do this. But I'll tell you how else the world is going to look at the world is going to look at the United States very poorly on this as well. But I have a theory that the U.S. is only voting alongside Israel because what else is the U.S. going to do if the U.S. votes against Israel and Israel does what Israel wants to do, which I believe Israel is going to do what it wants to do. Netanyahu's made it clear, don't care what the United States says. In the past, he says United States we can manipulate them. They're in our control. They're our puppet, not the other way around. And if the U.S. votes against Israel and Israel continues to do what Israel does, it showcases the fact that the U.S. has lost control of its little brother Israel in the Middle East. And that would be embarrassing. So I think that's why the U.S. at this point is going to continue to back Israel, because the U.S. knows if the U.S. doesn't back Israel and Israel continues to do what Israel's going to do, that it's just another sign the U.S. has lost complete power and U.S. hegemony and control is over. So I think we're just going to see continued support of an ethnic cleansing campaign, of a very shameful ethnic cleansing campaign going on against the Palestinian people.
I think this is an interesting point, as Anna Jackson says in the comments. It's worth taking into consideration this, right? At the same time, I am more in favor of what Sunny said. The US can cut off weapons and dollar, but won't do, of course. Like both arguments are correct. Maybe the truth is in the middle, right? But if the United States wants to stop these atrocities in the Gaza Strip, they have the means to stop this now in the UN Security Council and outside the UN Security Council, in secret meetings behind closed doors with their ally Israel, and in public. They have the means, they have the financial means, they have the military means, unless there are people who argue that the Israeli lobby is too strong in the United States, and we're coming to elections in 2024, and the Democratic Party, the Biden administration, and the circle of the bureaucrats in the in the administration, in the Pentagon, etc., they want to be reelected, or they want to keep their jobs in the future, right? So any sort of backing off from supporting unconditionally, let's say, Israel, they may lose the support of the Israeli lobby, and they may lose also the funding of the Israeli lobby. And there's many politicians, congressmen and congresswomen they received donations from the Israeli lobby. This is no secret, it's public information. And they have gained influence over American policy, right? And there is an amazing book about this called Israel Lobby and US Foreign Policy. You should all read this book, guys. It's an amazing book. I have read it in 2010, and I can still rely on this book and the information of that is mentioned in this book to build my understanding of the US foreign policy and its wars in the Middle East. Now, I want to focus on one particular thing in this that happened in the past days. When the Israeli side murdered a Palestinian poet in the Gaza Strip, which was really sad news, because I wanted to host Rifat al-Arir. Rifat al-Arir is a Palestinian poet. He used to be a voice for the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, and he appeared on many mainstream and non-mainstream media outlets speaking about the pain, the suffering of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. I wanted to contact him and also host him on my show. Unfortunately, he has been killed, and this report says that he is executed. This is a very short, I would say, introduction of who was the poet and what did he do in the Gaza Strip. I think it's worth watching these 2 minutes just for us to understand who was this person and his background.
Israeli airstrikes have targeted a home in Gaza, killing the renowned Palestinian writer, poet, and professor Rifat al-Arir. He co-founded a youth-led Palestinian non-profit project called We Are Not Numbers. It tells the stories behind Palestinians in the news and advocates for their human rights. Rifat edited the book called Gaza Writes Back, a collection of short stories written by young adults. 6 members of his family, including his 2 siblings, were also killed in the strike. This is an excerpt of one of his poems called If I Must Die. It says, "If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings. Make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze, and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale." Let's now speak to Ahmed Nehad, who's a friend.
So this is the background and the context of the Palestinian poet Rifat al-Arir, that many people say he was targeted and killed on purpose by the Israeli side. And this is a report by Richard Silverstein, and he's a Jewish author and a journalist. And he says Israeli security cabinet orders execution of Palestinian poet because of a joke on X. And the joke was when the Israeli side was claiming that the Hamas militants have baked the babies in the ovens. Of course, there is no evidence for that. And if there is any evidence, I would strongly condemn, and more than condemn, if there is any word about that, I don't know in the dictionary. But there is no evidence for that. And they haven't shown any evidence, but they just perpetrated that, or they repeated that allegation over and over again for the people to buy into the narrative. And Refat Al-Arir from Gaza Strip, he made a bad joke, let's say, and he said, were they baked with a baking powder or without a baking powder? Because he didn't believe in the Israeli narrative. And this is, if you understand Arabic, you would also know that this is a type of joke that people do in the region. Probably it's not more understandable for the Western public, but in Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, people would say such jokes. I believe maybe it sounds so offensive to the people in the West. However, if there is no evidence for that, and you made such a joke about something that never happened, it's still a joke. But if it happened and you make a joke like that, that's horrendous, right? So we have to draw a line. If the baking babies incident happened and you made a joke about it, that's horrendous. If you made a joke about this allegation which never happened, then it's a joke. And up until this moment, there is no evidence for that. And the Israeli side had all the time since October the 7th to provide an evidence for that, and they didn't. Anyways, so this Jewish journalist believes that he was targeted. And this is what he says. Refat was an unusual combination of teacher and activist. He not only taught his students Palestinian poetry, he also taught them Hebrew poetry. Unlike Israel's educational system, which promotes a triumphalist ideological indoctrination, Al-Arir's teaching of Hebrew poetry analyzed and appreciated the beauty of the language, but critiqued that ideology underpinning it. So, unlike Israel's educational system, which promotes a triumphalist ideological indoctrination, Al-Arir's teaching of Hebrew poetry analyzed and appreciated the beauty of the language, but critiqued that ideology underpinning it. He wanted his students to be able to understand the Israeli perspective, if not to agree with it. He was a humanist and realized there was humanity, some at least on the other side, far too complicated for the liberal Zionism of the times. So, who killed Refat Al-Arir? According to Richard Silverstein, he says that he has sources in the Israeli security apparatuses. He says, I broke the story here about Israel's security cabinet issuing the Amalek directive to assassinate 6 senior Hamas leaders and their families. It also similarly targeted specific journalists and their families. The IDF has murdered 80 journalists, suggesting that it is deliberately targeting them for execution. This is a war crime. An Israeli security source confirms my suspicion that the cabinet ordered Refat's execution because his joke marked him as being a member of the tribe of Amalek, an eternal enemy of the Jewish people. He was no such thing, of course. He was a poet, a teacher who loved literature. He was also a champion of his people. He was an implacable enemy of injustice. For that, he died. Along with him, Israel killed his brother, sister, and their 4 children. It knew it would them along with the intended target. But killing entire families is now the Israeli modus operandi. I found a very, very touching and emotional video of one of his students. Her name is Shaima Ziara. She is now in Canada. And Zachary Foster, who was my guest on Syriana Analysis, he found this video, this segment, and he says an incredibly powerful and emotional eulogy of Dr. Refat Al-Arir, one of Gaza's heroes killed by Israel. And this is one of his students, and she's speaking about his teacher and the impact that his teacher left on her. I think it's better to listen and watch to people who knew Refat personally instead of judging from what the Israeli side, which considered Refat an enemy, say about Refat. Let's take a look.
I first met Rafat back in 2008, so that's over 15 years ago. I was only 14 years old back then, and he was my teacher in a youth program. At that time, I was a young, malleable mind, and it was an honor to have been his student and to get the privilege to have my whole worldview shaped by him. He introduced us to Malcolm X. He taught us about the Black Liberation Movement and helped us draw comparisons with the Palestinian struggle for liberation. He taught us about Edward Said's Orientalism. He encouraged us to think critically and to thoughtfully engage with literary characters we didn't necessarily agree with. He taught us to see humanity in everyone. Rifat is the reason I am who I am today. He didn't treat us like we were children. He never made us feel like he knows better than us. He treated us like great, capable minds, even when we were just, foolish teenagers. In class, he liked to inject his lessons with humor. He would tell great jokes, but also a lot of lame ones too. He liked to tease his students. It was almost like a bonding exercise for him. He loved telling us about his mischievous shenanigans as a young kid and as a university student. And even at that time, he would tell us about the pranks he would pull on his friends as an adult. He never lost his sense of humor, even in the darkest of times that we're seeing right now. Rifat grew and we grew under his wings. When I went to university, he was also my professor, and I looked forward to every single class of his. We were discussing Shakespeare, performing soliloquies, writing poetry. We looked up to him like a big brother, like a friend that will always be there for you and will give you the best advice whenever you go for him for advice. In early November, when my brother Ahmad was severely injured in an Israeli bombing, Rifat was texting me almost every day whenever he gets a connection, and he would ask about him. My brother and I, by the way, share the names of Rifat's eldest children, Shaima and Omar. When my brother succumbed to his wounds, Rifat was devastated. He was the dynamite behind the freelance work of the youth in Gaza, Rifat said. And even in the darkest of times, when he was worried for his safety and for his family's safety, Rifat still made the time to check on me and my loved ones. In one of his interviews with Electronic Intifada on a live stream, he was talking about how bleak and dark the situation is. And that's when he broke down crying. Seeing that really broke my heart. Because Rifat was always smiling, always quick with the witty, snarky remarks. He was overcome with grief. But by the end of that sentence, you could hear him regain his strength and his voice getting stronger and becoming even more determined. Because that was Rifat, that's who he was. Like a phoenix, he would always rise up from the ashes. And today he still rises up through his legacy, through his words, his poems, his stories, and the minds that he has shaped. Just like in the poem of the Iraqi poet Ahmad Matar, Rifat is like a wheat stalk. Even when that wheat stalk is falling to the ground, he is only falling to plant more seeds. We are those seeds, and we promise to stand tall and strong and carry his legacy forward. And as Suzanne Abu Hawa said, Rifat did not die, he multiplied.
Rifat did not die, he multiplied. Such people, whether you agree with them or not, they leave impact on people's hearts and minds. Whether you agree with their ideology or with their poems or with their, view on life, but they're people who look up to them. And when they die, they try to stick with the values that this person has taught them. And one Rifat will give birth to many Rifats. This is the case every time. So when Israel murders such person, they are just giving birth to many Rifats. And see, this doesn't stop. This is trans border thing, right? And it doesn't stop in Palestine. This is Brian Cox. Those who don't know Brian Cox, he is a Scottish actor. He's a classically trained Shakespeare actor. And he is also known for leading performances on stage and television, as well as supporting roles in films. So he's quite famous character. And he is reciting here the poem of Rifat. He's reading it by himself as he's reciting it, and I think it's very beautiful gesture by him to post this on social media for the rest of the world to see that the suffering of the Palestinians is receiving solidarity and sympathy by large swath of by many people around the world. This is not exclusive to the Palestinians or the Arabs. It is international, and this has become more a symbol on the symbol for people struggling to gain minimum level of dignity, I would say, and statehood. Right? Let's take a look what Brian Cox says.
If I Must Die by Rifat Alaria, November the 1st, 2023. If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings. Make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale.
So, many people are showing solidarity with him, to be honest, on social media platforms, and they are also, unfortunately speaking, many of these, in my opinion, Israeli employed influencers are trying to justify his murder because he has made a bad joke. So, also, this sets another precedent, guys. If you make a bad joke on social media, you might get killed by some power because they don't like your joke, although the joke that he made about this particular case is an allegation, never been proven to be correct, right? And this is himself. This was before when the attack on Gaza started. And this is him speaking about this case, and you can judge yourself, and you can see if this guy is a monster or if he is a humanist by just watching him, his words, his emotions, his eyes. So that's why I bring such videos to you, so that you guys judge.
We know that it's very bleak, it's very dark. There's no way out. If there's no water, there is no way out of Gaza. What should we do? Like drown? Like commit mass suicide? Is this what Israel wants? And we're not going to do that. And I was telling some friend the other day that I'm an academic. Probably the toughest thing I have at home is an expo marker. But if the Israelis invade, if they target us, charge at us, open door to door to massacre us, I'm going to use that marker, throw it at the Israeli soldiers, even if that is the last thing that I would be able to do. And this is the feeling of everybody. We are helpless. We have nothing to lose. We know that.
Imagine, guys, while he was live and this bombing in the background happening. The dehumanization of the Palestinians, in my opinion, is leading to this, right? And this is the Israeli deputy mayor of Jerusalem, and this is his photo. I translated his tweet. He said, quote, "They are not human beings, they are subhumans." His name is Aryeh King. He is the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. He said, "IDF eliminates the Muslim Nazis in Gaza. We have to pick up the pace. If I had made the decision, I would have jumped 4D9S, I don't know what he means here, and put them behind the mounds of death and given the order to cover all these hundreds of ants while they were still alive. They're not humans and not human animals. They are subhumans, and that is how they should be treated. To protest the memory of Amalek, we will not forget." I tagged Elon Musk, and in 10 minutes, by the way, just for you, for credibility, guys, this is the post translated to English. He wrote it in Hebrew, and I translated it quickly so that you guys see what he said in this. And he deleted it when I translated the post and tagged Elon Musk. They said this post violated X rules and they deleted it. I don't know if Elon Musk saw it. I don't know if somebody reported it, but thankfully it has been removed. But whether it was removed or not, it shows the mentality in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, among the Israeli politicians or the ruling establishment in Israel of what they think of the Palestinians, whether it's in Gaza, whether in the West Bank. And rest assured, if they finish the business in the Gaza Strip, they're coming to the Palestinians in West Bank. They're not going to leave any Palestinian in Palestine, no more. And the Israeli paid influencers on X, they're already spreading now maps of Israel, which includes all Palestine. There is no Palestine. And they say this is from the river to the sea, you will only see the Israeli flag. And on X, Elon Musk claimed that if you say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be freed, you will be removed from the platform because this is a call for a genocide. But at the same time, when the Israelis are doing that, it's okay, and they are spreading this map on social media platforms. And this doesn't imply any genocide in their opinion, right? Let's move a little bit, guys, to the Ukraine case. It's still very important and relevant for all of us to understand. And Zelensky travels to the United States with the hope that he will secure tens of billions of new military aid package to Ukraine. And he came back to Kiev with only $200 million package of aid. So the end of Zelensky's rule is very, very close, in my opinion. Biden announces $200 million in aid for Ukraine as Zelensky meets the GOP skepticism in Congress. President Joe Biden announced $200 million in pre-approved aid for Ukraine after Zelensky's marathon day of meetings on Tuesday. The latest tranche of assistance came as the Ukrainian president visited the White House and Capitol Hill to make the case for additional U.S. support as an aid package with billions in funds for the war-torn country stalls amid partisan disagreements over immigration policies. Zelensky, in an exclusive interview with NBC News after the news conference, said that his meetings with lawmakers were helpful in that he got a chance to offer a detailed explanation of progress in his country's war against Russia. Zelensky also described his meeting with Biden as a positive one. Asked if he believed Ukraine would win the war, he said, "Yes, of course." Of course, yeah. He has been winning the war since February 2022. Anyways, Zelensky on Tuesday spoke with lawmakers in a closed-door gathering on Capitol Hill, where there is growing GOP skepticism about providing more financial and military support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. He met with House Speaker Mike Johnson, who said that he had a good meeting and reiterated that he stands with Zelensky against Putin's brutal invasion. But Johnson also voiced concern about Ukraine's ability to defeat Russian President Vladimir Putin. Republicans have pushed back against Biden's proposed aid package, which also includes funding for Israel and U.S. border operations, unless Democrats agree to pair the aid with tougher border policies. Republicans have also asked the White House for details on wartime strategy and how the administration defines victory in Ukraine. So the difference, it seems like these differences between the Republicans and the Democrats is not that they want to the Republicans don't want to send arms to Ukraine, but they want to also pair this aid with tougher border policies. If that happens, they would agree. But the truth of the matter is, it's very sad, in my opinion, what's happening in Ukraine and how they ruined this country and how this guy played as a useful idiot for the military industrial complex. And by the way, he met when he was in Washington DC with the heads of the heads of the arm industries. I think those were the people who were the happiest to meet with Zelensky, and those are the people who made the billions of selling the illusion that Ukraine can win this war, and they pushed hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to their deaths, right? And this is an honest article by Thomas Fazi, who was my guest in my previous live streaming. He says, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Western public has been sold the story of a Ukrainian front united in its unwavering commitment to a total military victory over Russia. Over the past few weeks, however, this narrative has started to crumble. Despite the failure of Ukraine's NATO-backed counteroffensive, which is now universally accepted, Zelensky continues to stick to the maximalist victory at all cost narrative that Ukraine must go on fighting until it retakes every inch of lost territory, including Crimea, and that Putin should not be negotiated with. This is understandable. He has staked everything on achieving that objective. Everything less would probably mean the end of his political career. In early November, none other than Ukraine's commander-in-chief, Zelensky, told The Economist that the war with Russia has reached a stalemate and was evolving into a long war of attrition, one in which Russia has the advantage. Many took this to mean that the general believes that the time has come to negotiate a deal with Russia. This led to a public confrontation between Zaluzhny and Zelensky, who rebooked the general's assessment and repeated his refusal to negotiate any ceasefire deal with Moscow. Imagine a former comedian who became a president and has no clue about military affairs is actually disagreeing with his top military commander and telling him that his assessment is incorrect and that he believes that Ukrainian armed forces can achieve a total victory against Russia, something that even a 3-year-old kid nowadays knows that this is unattainable and it's mission impossible for Ukraine, and better for them to negotiate a deal with Russia now before they lose more territories. And this has been also echoed by recently David Sachs. Since then, the rivalry between the two has grown into an all-out power struggle. According to the Ukrainian news site Ukrainska Pravda, Zelensky views Zaluzhny popularity as a political threat, and recent events have only heightened the president's fear. Indeed, the army, it reports, is divided between those who are subordinate to Zaluzhny and those who are loyal to ground forces commander Syrsky, an ally of Zelensky. Zelensky isn't just facing criticism over the way forward for Ukraine. Some are now saying that the entire strategy was botched from the start. Arestovich, Zelensky's former presidential advisor, now turned critic, recently wrote that the war could have ended with the Istanbul agreements and a couple 100,000 people would still be alive, referring to a round of peace talks that took place in March and early April 2022, mediated by Turkey. Remember, guys, when I was speaking about this case on Syriana Analysis, and people used to call me Putinist and Putin talking points, and that Russia didn't agree on any peace treaty in March 2022? And in April 2022. And now even the former advisor of Zelensky, he came out and said that they were able to save all these lives in Ukraine. If only Ukraine declared neutrality, Russia would have pulled back all its forces from Ukraine. On that occasion, Russian and Ukrainian negotiators had reached a tentative agreement on the outlines of a negotiated interim settlement, whereby Russia had agreed to withdraw troops along the lines prior to February 24, 2022, in exchange for Ukraine's neutrality. But the deal was allegedly blocked by Boris Johnson and representatives of the American State Department and the Pentagon. Even David Arachamia, the parliamentary leader of Zelensky's own Servant of the People party, who led the Ukrainian delegation in peace talks with Moscow, recently claimed that Russia was ready to end the war if we accepted neutrality, but that the talks ultimately collapsed for several reasons, including Johnson's visit to Kiev, informing Ukrainian officials that they should continue fighting. Remember, guys, what happened also after this case. The Russian side claims that when they were close to this peace treaty between them and the Ukrainians, they have pulled back from Kiev because they were surrounding Kiev from the north, right? They pulled back from Kiev as a matter of gesture. They gave a positive gesture or goodwill gesture to the Ukrainians that they are serious in signing a peace treaty with them. But the moment they withdrew from northern Kiev, there was this incident, the Bucha massacre incident, right, which they accused Russia, and Russia says it was orchestrated, it was staged, so that they foiled the negotiations between them. So whatever is the case, it seems that whoever made this Bucha massacre didn't want for Ukraine to sign this treaty with the Russians. And the ones that benefited from this, it's not Russia, it's not Ukraine. It seems to me that this is the military industrial complex, and those are the Brits who benefited from it. So I would argue that if this incident was staged, probably, I would say probably, the Brits or the Americans, without the consent or the knowledge of the Ukrainian side, they orchestrated this so that they foiled the negotiations with the Russian side. The growing tide of hostility towards the president and Ukraine's war strategy in general means that his political future looks increasingly in doubt. We shouldn't be surprised then that Zelensky recently ruled out holding elections originally scheduled for next March, citing problems of security and funding. Most Ukrainians reportedly support the decision, but this doesn't mean Zelensky's problems are over. After all, the failure of the counteroffensive is also causing a backlash among his Western backers as they realize that Ukraine is unlikely to improve its position in the battlefield. With such pessimism widespread, new aid pledges to Ukraine have fallen to their lowest level since the start of the war, according to the German-backed Kiel Institute's Ukraine Aid Tracker. One way for the Biden administration to save face could be to freeze the conflict for the time being, at least until the US election, through some kind of informal agreement with Russia. But this strategy presents its own problems. Not only is it far from clear that Russia would accept freezing the war while it enjoys a tactical advantage, but it would also require getting Zelensky on board or getting him out of the picture. So, in my opinion here, if the Russians agree in such a tactical maneuver with the Americans, they have to get rid of Zelensky. So the ones that they have to get rid of Zelensky are the Americans and the Brits. But I personally rule out that the Russians would agree to freeze this conflict. I think they are following the tactic of the slow grabbing of territories, and they can see that the Ukrainian armed forces are not receiving enough military aid and intelligence support from the Western governments as it was the case previously. So why would they stop now? In my opinion, the Russians have the advantage now, and I'm not talking my wishful thinking. I'm saying and analyzing the situation. Why would they not seal the borders of Ukraine with the Black Sea? Why, if I am a Russian strategist, and I'm not saying that this is my wishful thinking again, if I want to strip Ukraine of its geopolitical importance, then I would seal the maritime borders of Ukraine with the Black Sea, and I would turn it into a landlocked country. This is how you strip Ukraine of its geopolitical importance. So if the United States and the rest of the Western world are not going to provide similar type of weaponry and at the same pace and with the same amount, then the Russian side have already outperformed the Ukrainian side and the Western side in producing weapons, ammunition, and also repairing their weaponry. So now, when the Americans aren't supporting Ukraine the same way they used to support, then I would argue that the Russians do not only have tactical advantage but also strategic advantage over their adversary. From the US perspective, a democratic regime change in Ukraine would arguably be a preferable solution, but as noted, elections aren't on the table at the moment. This doesn't mean that change isn't coming, though. If anything, it only heightens the risks of Zelensky's opponents inside and outside the country trying to get rid of him by other means. Yes, I think this is going to be the case, unfortunately. And by the way, Zelensky was on Fox News recently, and from the question and from the answer, it's quite clear that there are major disagreements within his government and within his with his generals, with the mayors of Ukraine about how to deal with this conflict. And this is something very extraordinary, in my opinion, because going on Fox TV and a public television and criticizing your own officials, whether they're generals, whether they're politicians, it's something. It shows the fragmentation in his government and the opposition he is receiving from his officials in his government, and we can accordingly predict what could happen in the future. And I think since he canceled the elections, I think he will be removed in a non-democratic way, which means coup d'etat against him. So this is the question.
Mr. President, there are critics who say that you've tried to consolidate power. Headlines that the Orthodox leader in Kyiv under house arrest, that you consolidated Ukraine's TV outlets, that you ruled out holding elections next spring, calling for unity. But then the mayor of Kyiv says that you're turning it into an authoritarian state. How do you deal with that criticism? What do you say to critics who are saying that?
I say such person from government or mayors think about the war, think about how to defend our people. Don't travel through the world each day. Travel to the front line. Ask people, ask soldiers what they need. do this, not build roads for today. Don't do it. Spend all your money to the weapon, to the drones, to the society, to the pensions, and etc. And don't cry, because you are leaders, and that's it. That's why we are, and that's why we stay, because mostly people are not crying. People stay and fight against Putin, and we don't have any enemies in our country. We can't have time for this, and we don't have it. We have only one enemy. This is Putin, and that's it.
But you'll stand from democracy going forward.
Yes, of course, and of course, because we are really defending democracy, and we are really defending freedom.
Mr. President,
he is defending democracy, guys, by canceling the elections in Ukraine. Anyways, I think he's very delusional, this guy, and his end is very near, and it's going to be bad for Ukraine. Unfortunately, also he will just flee the country and with his wife and live his just beautiful life abroad, probably on the shores of United States or somewhere in Canada. And one of the people who were correct on Ukraine for a long time is David Sachs. He says Ukraine has lost Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, most of Kherson and Zaporizhia forever. If it doesn't negotiate a peace deal now, it will also lose Kharkiv, Odessa, the rest of Kherson and more. The flag wavers who think they're helping Ukraine are just dismembering it. And this is exactly what I said, guys. Why would the Russian side agree on this? And I just want to show you quickly the map of control over Ukraine so that you see what can the Russians achieve if they want to continue this war. And those are the newly occupied areas in Ukraine, and if they seal this area to Odessa Oblast, for example, they would seal they would block the access of Ukraine to the Black Sea, and therefore it will turn into landlocked country. This is, I think, the strategy of the Russians there. If the Americans stop the aid, they will definitely try to advance here unless there is some sort of a peace treaty and comprehensive security deal with the Americans, which establishes a new security structure for Eastern Europe, like which includes Poland and all other East European countries, and not only in Ukraine. But we are very far-fetched from that. It's very far away from that. Guys, finally, before I end up this, I would like to thank you all for tuning in on Syriana Analysis. And as I told you at the beginning, I had to be absent in the past 2 weeks, but I'm back and I will be doing live streamings almost every day, I think, except for Sundays. I will see how things are developing in Palestine, in Ukraine, in Syria, in Karabakh, in China, in Taiwan, and elsewhere. I will also continue doing interviews with experts. I will reschedule the interviews that I had to do before I be absent. Tomorrow I will probably also do another live streaming a little bit late, like today. Usually I'm doing at 5 p.m. Central European times. It depends on my second work. Tomorrow I have to go to my other work. As I told you, I'm also working 2 jobs. So if you want to support my independent work, guys, you can become a patron. Link here is on the description on the screen. And now I will leave you with a video. It is a compilation of judging from the YouTube channel Judging Freedom. A person called Christian Malazarte, he made a compilation of segments of videos he took from the YouTube channel of Judging Freedom. And this video speaks about how the Biden administration is enabling the atrocities in Gaza, and that America is complicit with the war crimes in the Gaza Strip. Those are many different guests, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 guests are speaking the same exact same thing, guys. So I will leave you now with this video, and I will see you hopefully tomorrow.
Well, the Biden administration could end the occupation of Palestine tomorrow. They could have a Palestinian state while we're doing this live stream. All they have to do is say no more spare parts for your F-16s, no more F-35s, and it's over.
Well, we are enabling. They would not be able to do this without the intelligence we provide, without the ammunition that we provide, without the weapons we provide.
So what this does is it enables the Israelis to conduct their ethnic cleansing, to begin this campaign to clear Gaza. as well as all the support that goes into the bombing campaign. Certainly the bombs are coming from the U.S. The planes came from the U.S. It's all subsidized by American taxpayer money.
Israel could not do this without full support from the United States. We are the primary people to blame.
Since there is no appetite for U.S. military entering wars, we have found these proxy wars to enter, thereby enriching the military-industrial complex at the expense of the American public.
And the only thing that allows them to get away with violating every other international norm when it comes to this stuff is American protection. So if America would just butt out, they would have to figure out a better way to proceed.
Because Israel its occupation depends entirely on its direct line to Washington. And Biden won't do that. And Tony Blinken won't do that because Tony Blinken comes from a long line of Israel lobbyists.
And in a diplomatic effort, such as last week, the United States being the lone nation to vote against a ceasefire. I mean, none of this is possible without the United States' support. And so all of us as Americans are directly involved in this campaign of ethnic cleansing.
The United States of America supports this ongoing war crime. But it's not as though we just discovered it on October 7th. The basic principle of collective punishment came out of a 2006 doctrine, the Dahiyat Doctrine. Dahiyat is a suburb of West Beirut that was leveled by the Israelis as part of their collective punishment of the Lebanese people because Hezbollah was embarrassing the Israeli army during that short 33-day war in August of 2006. So they collectively punished the Lebanese people. Since 2008, Israel's been doing this, 2008, 2010, 2014, 2018, 2020, 2021, collectively punishing the people of Gaza.
I think we have to accept the fact that the United States has gotten through a lot of unjustified wars ever since World War II and has killed millions of people in countries that were no threat to the United States, where there was no casus belli justifying what took place.
You know, as a former U.S. Marine, a former member of the military, or someone who was part of the State Department as well, I am embarrassed and ashamed at how the U.S. military and the diplomatic corps of the United States is going along with this ethnic cleansing. This is such a stain.
I have to tell you that for my country to be involved in supporting genocide is a little too much for this guy who served in our armed forces and used to be still is a big patriot.
But what I would like to at least see is some kind of understanding on the part of the public, or a part of the public that is interested in what the United States does and how it does it, that this was awful. We've come to that understanding about what we did to Iraq. We've come to that understanding about what we did to Afghanistan. You might throw Libya into that pile, and we're trying to do the same thing to Syria. We've done awful things in these places, but you can read about it now. People are looking back on it and saying, look, these things were wrong, and they continue to be wrong. So maybe there will be a learning curve. I'm not too optimistic about that, but I would love to think that actually the United States, the country I love, the people I love, will learn from their mistakes.
Right. The only way that Israel can behave this way is because of the moral hazard of American support. Right. The international law says they have to get all their settlers out of the West Bank. Right. UN Security Council resolutions dating back since the 1967 war say you have to withdraw everybody out of the occupied territories. You can't do that. It's a war crime.
I would go one step farther. The U.S. is not tolerating it. It's enabling it. Without U.S. armed and political support, Israel would stop this genocide. Now, I use genocide advisedly, okay? Look at that clip now. What is Blinken saying? He's saying, okay, we told the Israelis that before they resume the genocide tomorrow, they ought to make sure that there's some sort of plan to make sure they don't kill too many civilians. I mean, hello, it's like having a humanitarian pause in the genocide.
And it's tragic. And more than 10,000 people have been killed, civilian, innocent people in Gaza. And of those, more than 100,000 children